Hey everyone, you're listening to Ankur Warikoo on Voice with Warikoo. On this podcast, I talk to you about entrepreneurship, how to grow in life, manage personal finances, handle failures, and a lot more things that just come to my mind. The episode begins. In this episode, I wanted to talk about one very regularly occurring theme in a lot of conversations, whether on email, whether on messages, DMs, which is the experiences people have growing up with their parents. And it's a fairly complicated thing because particularly in the Indian culture, parents are given this order, this reputation, this respect, this throne of almost being equivalent to God. And that means we grow up being told that parents are rarely wrong, that parents should be respected, which is true, they should be respected, that parents are the ones that brought you into the world. And by that measure, they gave you life. And whosoever gives life has this very powerful power within them. And that is almost equivalent to the highest force that we know of, and that is God. But what it did, which is unfortunate, is that it also brought about this notion that because they are godlike, because they are so superior, because they are the ones who brought us to this world, they are never wrong. Parents can never be wrong. And I think that is a very complicated ideology to live by. It's complicated because it is not true. The fact is that parents, before they became parents, were humans, were normal people like you and I. And that means that they became parents by choice, of course, but there was nothing that trained them for parenting. There was no school that they went to. All that they saw was their own experiences with their own parents, who are your grandparents. And based on how that relationship was, they also shaped up as parents and carved out ideologies, worldviews, and themes around how they would be like parents. But there was no guide, there was no mentor, there was no coach, there was no one telling them whether they're doing a good job or a bad job or how they could improve. And because this ingrained ideology that parents could never be wrong was instilled in us, they were never receptive to feedback. They were never receptive to a fact that they could be challenged in the way that they approach things and they could perhaps be wrong. And this combination makes it really, really hard for a parent and a child relationship to mushroom and become the way it should be. Because the truth is, parents are wrong. They're wrong not because they want to be wrong. They're wrong because every one of us will be wrong at some point of time or not. It's not a choice that we make. We don't get up every morning wanting to be wrong, wanting to screw around with a life, wanting to make something go bad. We just do it because we don't know any better. We don't know any better. And then we have, of course, been shaped up by our own experiences. Recognize the fact that your parents, which will be very true to my parents as well, went through a really hard time. They grew up in India, in a country or in an environment which was intensely tough. It was not about choices, it was about survival. It wasn't about, oh, should I become a YouTuber? Should I become a fashion designer? Should I become a journalist? Should I become a graphic designer? Should I become a lawyer or an engineer? It was all about, what can I do to ensure that I have a higher chance of survival? And that more often than not meant picking up choices that were very standard. That was about become an engineer, become a doctor, become a lawyer, become a chartered accountant. And there weren't choices that they could explore. And the few ones that did, most of them suffered badly. So there was, again, this set notion that, oh my God, you just have to be very, very risk averse, make choices that are very stable, do not try and dabble with a lot of things, pick up a government job if you can, because that's the best stability that you can get. And that was how they grew up. And they saw around them people who made choices that were outside of those regular choices suffer, not have a stable income, not have a stable family, not go through experiences that were in any way pleasurable. And that shaped them up. It shaped them up. So they grew up wanting stability, wanting growth, wanting income, wanting reputation, wanting respect. But their ways of getting it were very different. Add to that how their parents raised them up, which was in an even harder situation and an even harder world. Those were tough times, particularly for India as a country. We were going through so much, from the freedom struggle to everything that was happening. There was so much uncertainty around it. And everyone had to have some sort of a mechanism that got order in that chaos. And not surprisingly, our grandparents were mostly very tough. They were tough because they had to go to war. They were tough because they saw calamities. They were tough because they saw shit happen to them and to their relatives and to people who were close to them. And that toughened them in a way that it perhaps even curved their emotions and made them lesser of an emotive being than who you and I are. And you can see how that traveled. It's not your fault that your parents gave you an experience that you may not be very happy with, but do recognize where they came from and recognize the fact that they did their best. They did their best because they didn't know any better. They did their best because there was no training. They did their best because no one was telling them what was right or wrong. And one thing never changed. And I think one thing will never change. And that is, I don't think your parents want very different things from your life that you want from yours. If you were to truly sit down with your parents and have a conversation, you will realize that they want from life and from you the very same things that you want from your life and yourself, which is respect, which is reputation, which is stability, which is happiness, which is growth. The only difference is that their mechanism of getting to that point is dramatically different than yours, because they don't know as much as you do. They don't know what the world is all about, and they are still dabbling in this completely new world that they have been exposed to, that you and I are so comfortable with. But it doesn't change the fundamental objective of where do they want to see you in your life and how close, if not exactly the same, it is where you want to see yourself in your life. So if you are in a slightly difficult relationship with your parents, where you've not had a good experience, where you've realized that they made mistakes because of which you have suffered, then the best thing you can do is, number one, realize that they did their best. They did it in a manner that possibly was not even in their control. And yes, you may have suffered because of that, but you have a choice. This realization, this awareness is the start of that choice. That choice that you don't have to be governed by the experiences your parents shaped up. You have a choice of letting go of all of that. You have a choice of healing yourself. You have a choice that lets you take charge of your own life and not be limited by the experiences that you have had as a child. And that will have to start with forgiveness. It will have to start with you being able to forgive them for the fact that they were just normal people who were suddenly given the job of becoming a parent, whether by their choice, whether imposed by someone else, but clearly not trained and not experienced to deliver on that job. And when you get to that point, it's the first step towards liberating your own self. You have two choices to make. If you've not had a great experience growing up, you can either wallow in that misery, make yourself even more miserable, contain yourself, limit yourself by all those experiences, and keep reminding yourself, almost as an excuse, if I may use that word, of not wanting to fix things and move ahead. Or the second choice is take charge of your life, heal yourself, recognize how that experience shaped you up in negative or positive ways. And that realization, that awareness itself will get you to understand why you are the way you are. And when you understand why you are the way you are, you now have a mechanism to shape yourself up in whatever manner you want to. Because you now have a playbook that explains what drives you and why. Your parents did their best. No matter how much you want to give them on a scorecard of 10, they did their best. It's now your decision to take all of that, not be limited by what that score is, and get yourself up. And hopefully, in that journey, should you wish to become a parent, recognize how you now have a choice of being the best parent that you can for your kids, or at least being the best parent for your own self. All the best. Thank you for listening to this episode of Voice with Warikoo. To be notified of upcoming episodes, be sure to subscribe and follow the show on this app right now. Also, don't forget to rate and review the show because that just feels nice. Thank you.